It's recording here. All right. So I have to go and unmute the mic in the boardroom there. But first, I'll say thank you, Wally, so much for joining us today. We're very excited to come together, in a good way to hear these teachings once again. Wally's joined us a few times already, but today he will be sharing about the Sweatlodge teaching. And I'll let him introduce himself and tell you a bit about what you can expect today. I'm just going to hop on over 1 second. All right, here you go.
Go ahead and start.
Yeah.
Okay. So just stay where you are for now. I just want to begin with a song. Bonjour, Tanse. Before I speak to that song, I figured we start off with that cleansing ceremony this afternoon as we come together. And if you have some medicines as well, you can light them at this time if you'd like. But I'll try and send this out to all of us as well too. But a long time ago when I was new to the circle, people would bring out these medicines, they would light them, pass them around. But because I was new, I didn't know too much. So I always watched, kind of got the idea that we're inviting something, that we're sending something away. But I never knew why they would use the different medicines in this ceremony. So I always promised myself that if I ever had that opportunity to lead that circle, that I would take time to talk about that medicine before I lit it. So today again we're going to use sage, and one of the teachings that comes with this medicine, it belongs to the women. It's a woman's medicine, and it represents three things. Number one, it represents wisdom, because it's the women who carry that wisdom for the nation. Number two, it represents strength, because again, it's the women who are strong for the nation. Anytime that there's a wrong or unjust done to us as Indigenous people, it's always the women who are at the front, and it's up to us men to support them. Number three, it represents clarity or vision, because again, it's the women who have that vision for the nation. So today, as we take a little bit of time before we begin to cleanse that mind, that body, that spirit, maybe just take a moment, think about wisdom, Think about it in terms of that road that you've been walking, however long you've been walking your road. For myself, good things have happened, not so good things have happened along that journey. But that's for me to learn, right? Because that's what we call wisdom. Yeah? So maybe just think about one thing, maybe at least one thing that you've learned on your journey so far that's helpful to you today. And as we think about strength, we always think about the road we're walking today, whatever that road looks like for us. What kind of strength do we need today to walk our road? And the thing about life sometimes is we have all kinds of stress coming at us from all over in our own families, at work, yeah, in our communities. Yeah. And today with this whole COVID pandemic, right, even another stress, right? We got all kinds of stresses. And sometimes it's difficult for us to wake in the morning and to face that day once again. So maybe just think about what kind of strength do you need today to walk your road, whatever it looks like. And as you think about clarity or vision, imagine yourself 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. What are you going to look like? Hmm? But I'm not talking the wrinkles on our faces, but what kind of human being do you wish to become? So maybe think about those three things as we begin our day. Also, by us using this medicine, we're taking a little bit of time also to acknowledge and to honor our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunties, our nieces, yeah, our daughters, yeah, our partners, our granddaughters, all women. Yeah. And that includes those missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, especially their families, who today are still searching for answers, trying to find closure, right? So maybe take a moment and think about them as well. Last thing I just want to say before I light this medicine, in our ways, we don't force people, right? We don't force people to do things. So usually, if you're ever in a smudge ceremony and that medicine is being passed around and you don't feel like you want to, quite do that or participate in that way, that's perfectly okay because we don't force. So usually the protocol in that when that bowl comes to you is to just simply tap it and that'll let that person know to move on to the next person. There's some smudge for you as well. I just want to say much for joining us today. Again, um, I began by sharing my name, Bimashigi Nundijinikas, Mangando Dem. That name given to me is Soaring Eagle, and I belong to the Loon clan. But part of why we share our name sometimes in that way is we're told that all of us, every one of us, we all have spirit helpers, spirit guides. But sometimes my helpers, they might be halfway around the world, maybe halfway across the universe. Right? But as soon as I speak that name, Bimashigi, instantly they're here. Right? And the reason I do that is because I am only a human being. And sometimes my words, they might come out the wrong way, right? Which is not my intent, right? My intent is not to misguide anybody or to hurt anybody. But sometimes I need that help, so that my words come out in the best way that they can. So that, again, that's why we introduce ourselves through our spirit names in that way. But that first song I sang today, uh, a bear song, and the words are simple. Pipiti again, manitu makwa. What that song represents is that we can see that the grandmothers and the grandfathers' spirits, we can see that they've reached all four doorways and they're looking in on us. And as we see them looking in on us, we say to them, come in, come in, come in. My mind is ready for healing. My body too is ready. My spirit is ready for that healing. Come in, come in, come in. So this is one song maybe we might sing in a sweat ceremony, right? To invite those helpers to come and help us heal. So that's part of why I sing that song. It's to acknowledge that you know we all need that healing. healing in the way we think about others, envy, anger, jealousy, the way we think about ourselves sometimes, right? Can't do anything right. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. Or just the way we think about life. Yeah? Maybe, some of us sometimes we question ourselves. Why am I here? What's my purpose? Right? And sometimes our body also needs that healing because we all carry different illnesses in our bodies, right? And sometimes even our spirit might need that healing because sometimes we might not be able to see that road that we need to be walking. Yeah? And sometimes some of us sometimes we even want to give up on life. Right? We don't want to be here anymore. So it's through those songs and and that's part of why we invite that healing to come to us. Right? And we do that again through some of those songs in that way. Right? So that song in essence and that bear song that I just sang, it's an invitation song, right? Meaning that those grandmother, the grandfather spirits, they're with us. They're with us. They're sitting with us today. Yeah? And when I always refer to them as grandmother, grandfather spirits, who I'm talking about is I'm talking about our ancestors. Yeah? All of those that have gone ahead of us. Yeah? So when I sing that song in that way, for me personally, in that, I always think about my grandmother, my great grandmother, right? Who guided me a lot in my childhood. I think about my mom's uncle Jim, who was like a father to me growing up as a child. Right? I think about my son Shannon, who I lost when he was 10 months old, 30 plus years ago now. Right? I think about my daughter Vanessa. Uh, Miranda, who I lost 6 years ago. When she was 21 years old. So that's who I invite. That's who I invite. Uh, when we sing that song in that way, that's what I'm talking about when we say, when I say our grandmother, grandfathers, those spirit helpers, right? But anyways, that's part of why I sang that song. When we tell a story in our own ways, we never start a story with once upon a time. Because to us, our stories are real, right? So, a very long time ago, right? Creator put the human beings here on Mother Earth, and Creator made for the human beings a trail, and Creator told those human beings, follow that trail, and life will always be good. So they all left together on that trail Creator had given them. Yeah? But for some reason, the white nation, they left that trail to follow a new trail. The rest of the human beings, they kept on that trail Creator had given them. But then the Yellow Nation, they too left that trail Creator had given them to follow a new trail. The rest of the human beings, they kept on that trail. But then the Black Nation, they too left that trail Creator had given them to follow a new trail. And soon only the Anishinaabe were left on that trail. But for some reason, they too veered off that trail Creator had given them to follow a new trail. Not too long after they left that trail, the Anishinaabe they became sick, sick in how they thought about others, themselves, about life. Their bodies became sick, and even their spirits also became sick because now they no longer could see that road. They started to lose hope. They started to lose faith. It so happened that there was a little boy who lived with the Anishinaabe at that time, and he saw that his people were sick, and it hurt his heart to see that. So he took it upon himself to try and help his people. So one morning, he left his community and he started walking east. And he walked and he walked and he walked until one day he came across a turtle. That turtle asked that little boy what he was doing so far away from home. And he told that his people were sick, that he wanted to help them. I'm sorry, little boy, but I don't have that gift yet to help your people. But go back, I'm sure the answer is there. So he returned to where he had left his people, but nothing had changed. They were still sick. So then he started walking south, and he walked and he walked and he walked until one day he met that Shkodebejike we call him, that buffalo. That buffalo asked what he was doing wandering out there by himself, and again he told that his people were sick, that he wanted to help them. I'm sorry, little boy, but I don't have that gift yet to help your people. But go back, I'm sure the answer is there. And again he returned to where he had left his people, but again nothing had changed. So then he started walking west again. And for many, many, many days he walked and he walked and he walked until one day he came across that big water, and there he met that big fish. That fish asked that little boy again what he was doing so far away from home, and again he repeated that his people were sick, that he wanted to help them. I'm sorry, little boy, but I don't have that gift yet to help your people. But maybe go back, I'm sure the answer is there. And again he returned, found his people where he had left them, and still nothing had changed. So then the next morning he started walking north, and again he walked and he walked and he walked until one day he came across that Wapshkizimaqua, that white bear. That bear asked that little boy what he was doing wandering way out there by himself, and again he told that his people were sick, that he wanted to help them. I'm sorry, little boy, but I don't have that gift yet to help your people. But go back, I'm sure the answer is there. So once again he returned, found his people, but nothing had changed. So one night in his sleep, his spirit began to travel through his dream. And in his dream, he saw himself sitting up on this hill, and there the answer would come. So the next morning, when he awoke, he went to go and search out that hill. He found it just the way he had dreamt. And to the top of that hill he climbed, and that's where he went and sat for the next 4 nights, 4 days, without food, without water. Finally, on the fourth day, as he was sitting on that hill, the new eagle came and landed beside him. That eagle asked him what he was doing sitting on this hill all by himself, and again he told that his people were sick, that he wanted to help them. I'm sorry, little boy, but I don't have that gift yet to help your people. But I think I know where I can take you. Get on my back. So that little boy, he got on that eagle's back. That eagle had spread its wings and they started to fly. They flew and they flew till they reached Grandmother Moon. And on the other side, that eagle had landed. And when that little boy got off that eagle's back, in front of him sat 7 elders. Those elders asked that little boy what he was doing so far away from home, and again he told that his people were sick, that he wanted to help them. Those elders told that little boy, your people, Creator gave them a trail, and they left that trail. But what your people need to do is they need to come back to that trail, because that trail, it leads into their mother's womb. And that's one of our creation stories, or that Sweatlodge ceremony. Medea, that's what we call it in my Ojibwe language. Yeah? But that's one of the creation stories. They tell us that's the safest place for us to help ourselves, to heal ourselves, is in that lodge, in that ceremony. And that's one of the ways we try and run those lodges. That's one of the ways I try and run that lodge. I try and run it in a safe way, meaning that, yeah, it gets warm. Yeah, it gets dark. Yeah, but any time when we're in the lodge, if anybody is struggling, always let them know. Yeah. If you're struggling, let me know. Yeah. And we'll open that door a little bit. Yeah. We'll let some air back in, some light back in. Yeah. Because it's not meant to suffer. That's what the old people tell us. Yeah. That our lodges, they're not meant to suffer others. Yeah. And sometimes they say we've suffered enough already. Yeah? We don't need to suffer anymore. Yeah? So always try and run that lodge in a safe way, in a good way, in that way. But before that little boy left those elders, he asked, he said, how is it that we should ever find you again should we need you? Because you sit here on the dark side of the moon. From where we are, we can't see you. Ah, they get, yes, you're right. So that's why today they tell us we look into the night sky towards the northwest and we see that constellation we call the Big Dipper. Yeah? We count those stars, 7 stars to make up that constellation. Yeah? But next time when you're out on a clear, dark night and you look at the Big Dipper and you count those stars on the handle, that middle star, the second last star on the handle, if you look really hard and you look towards the uh, left side of it, just over top on the left side, if you look really hard, you'll see a tiny, tiny little star. Yeah? They say that's that little boy, yeah? Because he earned that right to sit with those elders. Yeah? And today, yeah, when we need that help, yeah, and whatever it is that we're experiencing, maybe, again, those elders, they're all sitting up there too. Yeah? They're all there in case we should ever need them again. Yeah? I first heard that story when I was a little boy. And my cuckoo, my great grandmother, used to tell me that story. I remember it, yeah, around 3, 4 years old, maybe 5 years old. I don't know. Yeah, but I remember that story because she retold it many times. I've heard it since as well. Yeah, I've heard others retell that story as well. Sometimes it's slightly a little bit different, yeah, but it always ends up with a little boy ending up on the moon and meeting elders up there. But anyways, fast forward a few years, in 1969, my Coco and I were watching this little black and white TV at our home in my community. But what we were watching that one night in 1969 is we were watching our relatives to the south of us here. They were landing a spaceship on the moon that night. And the very, very first words they said as soon as they touched down is that the eagle has landed. Hmm? And why I remember that is because as soon as they said that on the TV, my cuckoo, she turned to me and she said, Shkena, you see, she said, Kikiwintamon, I told you. Yeah? Because it was foretold a long time ago that one day an eagle would land on the moon. Yeah? It was foretold that when that happened, when that occurred, that our people would once again stand up. Yeah? And we would start saying enough to the government, enough to the police, even enough to the churches, even, right? Because we do have our own ways to help ourselves, to heal ourselves. And that Sweatlodge is one of those ways. Yeah? We have many other ways as well. Yeah? But ironically, in 1969, as the Americans were making history, our Canadian government over here, it too is making its little bit of history. And what they were doing at the time is they were developing legislation, policy, and they called it the White Paper. But the intent of that was to assimilate all Indigenous people into mainstream Canada. The intent of that paper was for the total extermination of all Indigenous treaty rights. That was the intent of that paper. So simply, at the end of the day, the intent was that we'd all simply be Canadian, right? All of us, right? That we'd no longer be Ojibwe, that we'd no longer be Cree, right? That we'd no longer be Mohawk, right? Or Lakota, right? Simply at the end of the day, we'd all simply be Canadian. Right? But that paper eventually got shelved, and within a year, it died. Right? And 50 plus years later, we're still here. We're still standing, and we're getting stronger. Because today, we've found our voices, we've found our spirit, and we can say enough to the government, to those police, and even to our churches sometimes as well. But the other teaching that comes with that story, and part of why I wanted to share it with you today, is that little boy, he saw a problem in his community. And what did he do? He went over there, he went over there, he went over there, right? Trying to find the answer. But meanwhile, the answer was within him all that time. All you really needed to do was dream it, right? That's all you needed to do. And the same is true for us sometimes, in this thing we call life, right? the same is true for us. Sometimes we'll come in front of an obstacle. Something will happen, right? And we'll go over there, we'll go over there, we'll go over there trying to find answers. Right? Some of us sometimes will even bring things into our bodies, right? To try and numb that hurt, that pain, whatever. Right? But the one place we sometimes forget to look, yeah, when those things are in front of our path, the one place we forget to look for the answer is within ourselves, yeah, within ourselves. So that's part again one of the teachings that comes with that story, yeah, that I just shared with you. So today we're going to talk about that Sweatlodge ceremony. So I was thinking, well, what's the best way to share some of that? Eh? So maybe one of the ways I thought in that was just at the beginning, like today, at the beginning today, and the day when we're wanting to maybe build a lodge. So one of the things we do in that is when we find that area where we're going to build that lodge, before we start brushing that area, clearing it out, whatever, we always take a little bit of tobacco. We always offer tobacco, and we'll ask first. We'll ask if this is a good place, if this is an okay place to do that. And we do that through that tobacco. And then we clear that area, wherever it is that we're going to build that lodge. So once we've done that, then we go and get those willows that we're going to use to build that lodge, right? But again, before we cut that very first willow, we'll take again our tobacco. Yeah? We'll ask first, yeah? And then we take those willows. Yeah? And once we come back to that area that we had cleared in that area where we're going to build that lodge, and we make those holes where we're going to build it, right? But in each hole, again, we might take a little tobacco, yeah? And we'll ask Mother Earth, right, to carry that lodge in a good way, yeah? And we use that tobacco in that way. Once we've built that lodge, with those willows, then we might go and get those grandfathers. Yeah? And what I'm talking about is those stones, those rocks that we're going to use as part of that ceremony. So maybe we'll go and get those grandfathers. But before we load that first grandfather into our vehicle, again, we'll take our tobacco and we'll put it out. We'll ask first. We'll ask. And then once we load up those grandfathers, we'll come back to where we have our sweat. We'll make a bed, right? And we'll put however many grandfathers we're going to be using inside that ceremony. Myself personally, I use 28. And I'll explain a little bit later what they represent. So, anyways, we'll put our grandfathers on that bed. And again, once again, we'll take our tobacco and we'll say those prayers, over those grandfathers. And some of those prayers might be to ask them to come and help us, to come and heal us. Excuse me, in that ceremony. So again, we'll use tobacco in
Oh,
that
hi,
way.
Shona.
We'll use
Hi,
tobacco.
I'm in the middle of it.
We'll use tobacco in that way, right? So we'll ask first, and then we put our wood on there, and then we'll light that fire, right? And maybe after about an hour or two, right, those grandfathers, they become red hot in that fire, and they're ready to come and do that work. We're ready to go in, right? But before each of us goes into that lodge, one of the next things we'll do again, we'll go back to that fire with our tobacco and we'll place our tobacco into that fire. We'll go and ask for whatever it is that we're going into that ceremony for. So maybe I might go in there for my relatives, right, that are maybe incarcerated. Maybe they're too sick, they're in the hospital, or maybe they're on the streets, and they can't come to ceremony, right? So maybe again we'll offer that tobacco back there. Or maybe we're going in for ourselves, maybe. So again, we'll put that tobacco before we go into that lodge. So once all of us have put that tobacco in, now we're ready to go into that ceremony. So one of the things that I share with people in that, and I've seen it before in other lodges as well, is I always tell people before we come in, that we always get on our hands and our knees. Yeah? And we crawl into the lodge. And we usually go to our left and we crawl into the lodge. And the reason we do that, or the reason I do that, is to acknowledge that sacred teaching of humility. Right? And by us getting on our hands and our knees, is we're humbling ourselves. Right? We're humbling ourselves to that ceremony, right? To that lodge in that way, and to those grandmother, those grandfather spirits. We humble ourselves that way. So we always crawl into the lodge. We never uh, you know, crouch into the lodge on our feet. Yeah? So that's one of the ways, or at least one of the things I always share with people before they come into the lodge. And we, like I said, we always go to our left, and usually it's the women that lead us. Uh, when we go into the lodge, at least again the one that I carry and the one I run. And part of that is the women occupy one side of the lodge, and us men we occupy the other side of the lodge. It's to create that balance, within that ceremony. So usually the women will crawl in, and they'll occupy that one side, and then us men will follow them, right? And then we'll follow them. So earlier I said that I used 28 grandfathers, and you'll notice that in other lodges and that sometimes they might just use five, they might just use seven, 14. Sometimes they'll use 60, sometimes they'll use over 100 grandfathers. Everybody has different teachings, right? But for myself, I use 28 and that. So once we've all come into that lodge, once we're all seated inside that lodge um, and we've brought in our rattles and our medicines and our drums, whatever that we're going to be using, and then we invite seven grandfathers into that lodge. And there's shkabe outside, usually with a pitchfork. We'll bring them and they'll slide them into the lodge for us. And we usually have a pit right in the middle, right? A little pit for the grandfathers. So each time a grandfather comes into the lodge, I always say, um, uh, bonjour, monsieur, miss, welcome, grandfather. Yeah, welcome, grandfather. Hmm? Um, so once each grandfather comes in, though, usually what we then do is we put a little bit of cedar. Right? Usually that's the first medicine we'll put on those grandfathers, a little bit of dry cedar, right, over top of them. And part of why we do that is cedar, one of the teachings that comes with that medicine, it's a protection medicine, right? And that's one of the teachings, that's that medicine we use to invite positiveness and to take away negativity in our thinking, in our bodies, and in our spirit. But the reason we sprinkle that cedar on those grandfathers each time they come in is part of the ceremony is that we're going to go and release, right? Whatever negativity, we're going to release it inside that ceremony. So by sprinkling that medicine, it's us acknowledging that we don't want anybody to get hit what is being released. And so it's a way to protect everybody, right? So that's part again why we sprinkle that medicine. But anyways, when those first seven grandfathers come in, one of the teachings I always share in that is the idea that they represent those seven generations before us. And who I mean, it's our grandparents, parents, great grandparents, seven generations. Who we are, what we are is because of them. They're the ones that made all the trails that we walk today. So that's what those first seven represent. Yeah? And again, the old people always remind us of that, and that uh, they made all those trails. But sometimes today, when we pray to them, sometimes that healing will take a little longer. And the reason they say is because those old trails, they've been disturbed. And what they mean by that is that we put up dams today, right? That river used to flow that way. Now that river flows this way, where that trail used to be. Or else maybe there's a big lake there now, where that trail used to be. Or else maybe there's a concrete highway, town, city, where that trail used to be. So we acknowledge those ancestors, right? in that way. So when we pray to them, they come right away, but now they get to that obstacle, right? Now they got to find a different way. So that's why they tell us that sometimes it takes a little while for that healing to come. The other thing we're reminded also is, when we think of our parents, for example, maybe some of them, maybe they didn't do a good job raising us. And sometimes maybe some of them, maybe they did a lousy job raising us. But what we're always told is, you know what? Be thankful. Yeah? They gave you life. And at least for that, we need to be thankful. Yeah? But anyways, that's what those first seven grandfathers represent when they come into that lodge. And before we close that door, we invite another seven grandfathers into the lodge as well. And those seven grandfathers, they represent those seven sacred teachings that we all hear about: love, respect, honesty, humility, courage, wisdom, and truth. Again, we're told that those teachings are simple. Love, right? It doesn't take a rocket scientist. They tell us that those teachings are powerful. Respect, powerful teaching. They tell us that those teachings are very beautiful. Humility. When I can understand that I'm no better than any of you, right? But none of you is any better than me either. Regardless the color of our skin, regardless what we believe in or don't believe in, at the end of the day, we're still all going to be human beings. And when we can accept that, when we can understand that, right? That's what makes those teachings powerful and beautiful. But the other thing we're told also about those teachings is that we don't walk them every day. Love, Love, is just a four-letter word, right? But when we walk that love, when we demonstrate that love, when we show that love, that's what makes those teachings powerful and beautiful. The last thing they tell us about those teachings is that we don't use them in a way in that they have to start from within us. Meaning, how can I love you if I don't first learn to love myself? How can I respect you if I don't respect myself? How can I tell you the truth if I'm not willing to tell myself the truth? So again, they're saying that those teachings have to start from within. But that's what those seven grandfathers represent. So usually at the beginning, right? Now we've invited the first seven, and now we've invited the second seven. So now we have 14 grandfathers in the lodge. And usually at that point, we'll close the door. And we'll usually close the door at that point. One of the ways, again, I run the lodge for myself personally, and that is as soon as we close the door, we all pray. And we all pray in our own way. And we pray to those grandmothers, those grandfathers, right? In those four directions, because they're the ones that guide us every day. And we pray to Mother Earth, thanking her for carrying us upon her back, but asking her to carry us one more day upon her back. So we pray to her in that way. We pray to Creator, to God, because it's Creator that watches over all of life. So usually after we pray, we usually then explain what these next two rounds, these two doorways, and we call them doorways, right? In the sense in that, if you can imagine, we have 28 grandfathers. We just brought in seven, and seven, that's 14 of those grandfathers, right? What they represent is those first two doorways. But usually, how I run the lodge, also then in that way, is acknowledging that the first two rounds that we do eh, are all about giving thanks. It's about giving thanks. It's about giving thanks again to those grandmothers, those grandfathers, about giving thanks to Mother Earth, about giving thanks to Creator. And usually when I run the lodge during those two rounds, I always ask people in that day to maybe um, think about. Think about all of those that have helped them along their journey. eh, Whoever that might be, whether it be their parents, their grandparents, aunties, uncles, cousins, their own partners, their own children, right? Or their best friend, Or sometimes, we all have that one teacher maybe, that, paid that little extra attention to us, and that gave us that little extra support, right? So in that round, we use that to give thanks. As we think about each of them, as they come into our memory, let's say thank you to them. Let's give thanks. So once, again, that's what those two rounds are about. But once we've completed praying in that, and once we've said, that these two rounds are about giving thanks, we then sing. Usually, I sing four songs in a lodge to begin with, while we're giving thanks. And one of the very first songs I always sing is um, that first bear song. That first bear song, which the words are simple. In that song, the words are Manituma Koga Benagazian Manituma Kwakajani Mishinam. What we say through that song is that we can see those grandmothers, those grandfathers walking towards us. And as we see them walking towards us, we say to them, come and bless us. But it's through that first bear song that we acknowledge that we all need that healing in our thinking, in our bodies, in our spirit. But it's also through that song that we also acknowledge that every one of us, we have that gift. And that's that gift to heal others, right? Sometimes it might be how we use our words. When we say kind things, good things, right? We lift that person up, we make them feel good about themselves. Sometimes maybe it just takes a hug, or maybe even just an ear. Yeah? When we take that little bit of time to listen, even though we might not have the answer for that person, but when we take that time to listen, we make that first person feel like they've been acknowledged, that they're important to us, right? So in that way, it's to acknowledge that we all carry that gift, and that's that gift to heal others as well. And that's part of why we sing that bear song. Right? That second bear song, the one I sang for you earlier, acknowledges that those grandmothers, grandfathers, they've reached for doorways. They're standing there looking in on us, and as we see them there, we say to them, "Bipiti again, come in, come in. My mind is ready, my body, my spirit is ready. Come in, come in, come in." So that's usually the second bear song I sing in the lodge. It's that invitation to invite them into that ceremony. And what I want to say about that is, myself personally, in that, I've never seen anything in the lodge. Uh, I've seen things at the Sundance. I've experienced things at the Sundance, but I haven't seen those things inside the lodge. But others inside the ceremony, sometimes they'll say they see lights. They hear things, right? They hear different animals in that lodge and that. Um, So part of that though is, again, because we invite those spirits into that, those helpers, we invite them into that ceremony. So usually by singing that second verse song, it's that invitation, for them to come. The third song we usually sing in that is a welcome song, a simple welcome song, because again, it's a reminder, like, when we have a visitor, what do we do? We become a good host, right? It's important to be a good host. So part of that third song in that is just, again, to acknowledge that welcome. Yes, we do a welcome song. And the fourth song I usually sing in the lodge is a creator song. Uh, the one most of us have maybe heard before, in that the words are simple. Kichimi grech mandu. Thank you, Creator. But again, it's through that fourth song that we acknowledge, you know, that little bit of time to say thank you, to those grandmothers, to Mother Earth, to Creator, to all of those that have helped us to be where we are today along our journey. So usually after that fourth song was done, usually we'll open that door, let some cool air back in, right? And along during the ceremony, of course, we're putting medicine onto the grandfathers as well. As part of the ceremony. So usually, uh, once we've opened the door and that, once we let cool air back in and that, usually we'll sit maybe for a moment or two. Maybe somebody will share a teaching or a story or something And sometimes we just spend a little bit of time laughing, right? Because laughing is medicine as well, right? So usually when we're ready after that, usually we'll invite seven more grandfathers into that lodge as well. And again, once again, we'll close that door. And those seven grandfathers, they're an acknowledgement of those seven generations ahead of us, our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren. And uh, in that sense, in that it's an acknowledgement that what we do to her today is going to one day affect them. Right now, Mother Earth, she gives us everything we need and want to have this life. But if we don't look after her, what's going to be left for them? And it's those seven grandfathers that represent those seven generations ahead of us. That circle that's around me, is that the same circle I want to pass on to them? Especially if my circle involves alcohol abuse, drug abuse, family violence, lying, stealing, cheating, is that what I want to pass on to them? And sometimes it's going to be up to us to break some of those cycles, right? And hopefully to replace them with something better, right? For those ones ahead of us. Right? But we're always thinking ahead, right? We're always thinking ahead of those next generations. And that's what those seven grandfathers represent, those generations ahead of us. So once they've come in, once we've acknowledged them, and again, like I said earlier, every time each of them comes in, we always offer a little bit of cedar as well. And so, anyways, once that's done, and again, we close that door, and now we're into our third round. Okay? And usually in the third round, that round is representative of in that we pray for everybody else except us. Right? All of those that need our prayers. Yeah? That's usually that third round. We pray for them. You know, all those little ones, right? Those children and that, especially those ones maybe growing up in that foster care system. Right? We always ask for their safety, their well-being, right? But we always pray also in the day that hopefully soon that they'd be reunited with their family, or even maybe just the community from which they come if they can't go back to their biological family, right? But we pray for those little ones. We always pray for our youth, our teenagers, yeah. We pray, for them to slow down a little bit because they live that fast life, right? But we pray for them to slow down a little bit and maybe take a little bit of time to go and listen to the elders, to go and learn some of those teachings, those stories. Eh? We always pray to our relatives that are sick in the hospital. As part of that round, the ones that are sick in the hospital, we pray for their good health, their well-being. We always pray also for our relatives that are on the street. We pray for warm food in their bellies, a safe place to rest at night, that nobody will come and harm them and hurt them. So we always pray for our relatives that are on the street, but in doing so, we're also praying that they too might find that path that they need to be on. We always pray to our sisters, our sisters that are in those women's shelters, right? That have run away from violence in their own homes. We pray for them. We pray for that peace to come to them, right? Uh, and we also pray for those that do some of that harm, those men. Yeah? And again, we pray for them that, maybe they'll wake up and realize those words and those ways of behaving, how it affects their loved ones, the ones they say they love, right? So we pray for them and we pray for that peace to come into their hearts as well, and that they too can wake up and realize how they choose to use those words in their actions, how it affects their children and their partners. We'll also pray to our relatives that are incarcerated, that are in those jail systems. And we pray for their safety and their well-being because, again, those places can be dangerous sometimes, right? And we worry about them. But we also pray maybe that they too will wake up and realize that every time they put themselves behind those institutions, behind those bars, it's like they're bringing us with them, right? Because when they're in there, we worry about them. Right? We worry about them. So again, we pray for them maybe to wake up and realize that they too can walk a different path. We always pray again also to our elders, our elders that are at home, that are home alone, or elders maybe that are in those old folks homes they call them, those senior homes. And we always pray for that one person, maybe at least to come and knock on their door. That one person that will come and listen to their stories, their teachings, so that they too can feel useful once again. But usually that's what that third round is for. It's about praying for everybody else except us, right? And usually again we'll accompany that with maybe some songs as well. But usually what happens also in that third round, at least again that lodge that I carry, is I always let that drum travel. And it always travels to the left of me. I sit on the west door, which is way at the end of the lodge, and usually the women occupy my left side. So I usually let that drum travel on that side. And usually, uh, when each person receives that drum, usually I ask them to beat it 4 times. And what that represents is acknowledging all 4 doorways. That person is acknowledging all 4 doorways. And I always ask them maybe to introduce themselves through their spirit name, through their clan, right? And again, with the understanding that we all have helpers, right? And it's their way to invite their helper at that moment as well by introducing themselves in that way. And then usually we'll ask, you know, once they've introduced themselves, once they've beat that drum 4 times, we'll ask them, then you can pray. You can pray for those that need your prayers, but you can pray for yourself too. That's okay. Right? You can pray for yourself as well too. And if you don't feel like praying, well, that's okay too. And again, it's not about forcing, right? It's not about forcing. So sometimes people maybe they don't feel like they want to pray. Right? So what we'll say is maybe you want to share something. Maybe you'd like to share something. And again, uh, uh, that's the opportunity for them to share whatever may be happening in their life at that moment. Or else sometimes we'll ask them, maybe you have a song that you'd like to share. And again, this would be the opportunity to share that song with the drum, right? And so usually that's what the people that have the drum in that's usually how they'll proceed. Um, uh, and then once they're done praying, sharing, or singing, once they're done, usually then we'll beat that drum 4 times once again. Right? And again, it's acknowledging that those 4 doorways, and I'm done. Right? So we close those doorways that way, right? And then that drum travels. Right? And usually, once that drum travels on the woman's side, and the last woman has shared or prayed, whatever, once that has been completed in that, before she passes that drum over on the eastern doorway, before that drum crosses over to the men's side, usually we'll stop right there. We'll open that door, and again, we'll let some cool air back in. And usually, again, we'll sit and we'll share teachings or stories or whatever, you know, just to rest up a little bit and cool down a little bit during that time. I just wanted to share with you, like many, many, many years ago, I was sitting in a lodge and we had the doors all closed and that it was dark and we were in ceremony. And inside the lodge, a young man, in the darkness, he asked the elder, he said, the one that was conducting the ceremony, he asked the elder, and how do I know when I have a vision? He asked. Yeah, that was the question he asked. And the elder that was conducting the ceremony, he said to the young man, he said, "Can you close your eyes?" He asked. Because in the lodge, we're supposed to have our eyes open, right? How can you have a vision if your eyes are closed, right? But anyways, he asked the young man, "Can you close your eyes?" And the young man said, "Okay." "Are they closed?" "Yeah, okay." Now what I'd like for you to do," he said, "I'd like for you to see yourself," he said. "I want you to envision yourself," he said, "in the forest. Could you do that?" He said. And the young guy said, "Yeah, okay, good." Now let's imagine that you're in the forest. He said, okay? Look at all those tall, straight trees all around you. He said, can you see those trees in your vision? He said. And the young man said, yep, I can see that. And then the elder asked him, he said, okay, now look up. He said, look at all those green leaves. He said, the trees are just full of leaves. Can you see all those leaves? And the young man said, yeah, I can see that. Okay, good. He said. Now he said, look above those trees. He said, look in the openings. He said, look at that clear blue sky up there. He said, can you see that? He asked the young man. And the young man again replied, yes, I can see that. And the elder said to that young man, well, you've just had a vision. And we all burst out laughing. But part of the teaching that comes with that is we're told that we all experience visions, right, throughout the day, right? But unfortunately, sometimes we have our eyes closed and we don't recognize them, we don't see them when they occur. Yeah? We have all kinds of visions throughout the day and that we're told every day. Yeah? And sometimes even in our sleep, through our dreams, those are a form of visions as well too. Yeah? But again, sometimes we have our eyes closed, yeah? We have our ears closed, right? Unfortunately, yeah, and we don't recognize them in that way. But anyways, we'll share stories, like I said, like in the lodge and that, when that door opens, sometimes we'll share different stories, different teachings with one another. And once again, once we're done, cooling down a little bit, we'll invite usually then the last seven grandfathers who represent the last of the four doorways, right? And we'll bring them in each time each one comes in. We'll sprinkle a little bit of cedar in as well. Um, and once the door closes and that, and then usually what we do with the fourth round is we acknowledge that in that round, that's for us. Whatever reason we all came in there that day, it's for us that last round. And that's what that round usually represents. And usually, in some of our experiences in that, that last round is usually the most warmest one. Right? It's the one that gets really hot sometimes, right? And sometimes that's the last, that one that we struggle the most in. Right? Is usually that fourth round, that last round. Right? But we're always reminded, that little bit of suffering we do in that ceremony, in that sweat ceremony, is nothing. It's nothing compared to what our mothers went through, right, to give us life. All right? And us men, we will never understand that teaching. Right? Only women understand that teaching. Right? But that's what we're told. Yeah? That last round, that little bit of suffering is nothing compared to what our mothers went through to give us life. But again, usually that fourth round is about ourselves. Yeah? And usually, again, we might sing a song to begin that round. And then at that point, the drum crosses over to the men. Yeah? And again, each man is given an opportunity, to introduce themselves. They beat that drum, those four doorways, acknowledging them. And again, they have an opportunity to pray. In that sense, again, they're told, you can still pray for others as well too, right? Even though this round is just for us, you can still pray for others that need your prayers, and you can pray for yourself. Or if you don't feel like praying, that's okay as well. And uh, or if you don't feel like praying, then you can share whatever's on your mind, or you can share a song with the rest of us. Yeah? And again, as the drum travels in that, with each person sharing uh, or praying, then usually it gets back to myself, and usually uh, I say my own prayers as well too, and that, yeah. And then we're almost at the end, and one of the songs we always finish up with, at least again in the Lodge Die Carrying, is we always finish up with what we call the Windigo Con song. Yeah, but I'll tell you about that song a little bit later. And and once that song is done in that, and during that time, whatever medicine we have left in that pail, usually we'll pour the rest of that into the grandfathers. Yeah? And once that song is complete, and then we open that door to let that cool air back in. And usually that's when we're done. But one of the things I always share, well, two things I always share with people before we leave that lodge. Number one in that is to go and say thank you to that shikabe outside the lodge, the firekeeper, and the one who was keeping the fire for us, who brought in the grandfathers for us, right? To go and make sure they say thank you to that person, because we could not have had that ceremony without that person. Okay? So their role in ceremony is just as important as the person that's conducting that ceremony, okay? If not even more so, right? Um, so they're doing that heart work outside, okay? While we're um, healing inside that lodge. Okay? And in that way, that shikabe, he too, or she, they'll get blessed as well too, and anybody else that might be sitting outside that lodge, right? So I always tell our participants, whoever's inside the lodge, when they go out in that, the first thing, go and thank that shikabe, go and thank that helper. And the second part in that is I always tell them also in that, you know what, go back to that fire, right? Take your tobacco, go back to that fire and give your thanks. Give thanks for whatever it is you may have received in the ceremony. Go and offer that tobacco. Say miigwech, say thank you to those grandmothers. They say thank you to Mother Earth, say thank you to Creator. Hmm? The last thing I usually tell people before we come out of the lodge, and this is geared specific to women, and sometimes men too as well. But I always tell people that nobody should ever have to touch us in the lodge. Right? Nobody should ever have to touch anybody in the lodge. Even the person conducting, even if we've asked for specific healing. That people should not have to touch that person to do that physical healing, right? And if they really have to touch that person, I always tell them, then they should be able to do that with that door open. So the rest of us in that lodge can see exactly where it is that they're putting their hands. And the reason I do that is unfortunately sometimes some of those that are running our lodges and that, some of those that are running our ceremonies, they're not healthy. Yeah? They're not balanced, right? Because they haven't done that healing work. Yeah? But they're running ceremony. Yeah? So I always tell everybody in the lodge that we all have that right to say no. And if something does not feel good to us, right, that we have that right to say no. Right? That I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to touch me, right? Whatever, right? So it's again to acknowledge that. Okay? And unfortunately, that's something we have to do. And part of that for me is because I've been in that child welfare system for many years, and I've seen some of that damage that abuse can do to others. And in the work that I do today and the relationships that I have with other people, again, I see it day after day after day. The damage that abuse can do to others, right? So for me, that's important, and that's one of the last things I always do when I run that ceremony, particularly, is to remind all of us that for us to be careful, and for us, you know, to do that healing work in the best way that we can, in a good way, right? And lastly, that we all have that right to say no. And usually the women lead us out of the lodge, and us men we follow the women out of that ceremony. So in that way, that's one of the things I wanted to share with you. Right? One of the teachings I wanted to share with you before we take a little break was that in regards to that that teaching of that Sweatlodge, and part of that is my own personal experience as well too. Right? And one of the last things I just want to say in that is that uh, you know what? I'll say it after we come back after a little break in that. Well, let's take a little break in that, and then we'll come back and I'll share a little bit more before I try and answer maybe a few of your questions. And I see that some of you have typed out some questions already earlier or comments. Miigwech?
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll take let's say a 5 minute break. Yeah, 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 10 minutes after 2. or 11 minutes after 2 in about 5 minutes. But while you guys are grabbing a glass of water or taking a break, just wanted to let you know I'm going to be sharing a link in the chat here, and it's for our feedback survey. I just wanted to let you know that we're actually going to do a draw. I've got 2 calendars here. They were designed by Chantel Daniels. So they're 2021 calendars. So it's already a few months into the year, but these are really great calendars. They're called Moon Phases and Medicines. So I don't know if you can see, there's beautiful artwork. And then each month has a new design and a great saying. But it's a great calendar because it shows, I'll show you, the different phases of the moon, as the days progress. So to be entered into the draw, there's a spot on our feedback survey, which I just put into the chat. So if you want to fill out the survey, we'd love to get feedback. So this is, to entice you to do that as well. But if you could give us some advice, fill out the survey, and then there's a spot for you to enter your email address if you would like to be entered into the draw. So after today's session, maybe around 4 o'clock, I will go onto our Facebook, so you can look at our Facebook page stories, and I'll do the draw there. So we'll take a short break now. If anybody has any questions, there was one question earlier, but if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to put it into the chat. I'm keeping a list of questions that come up just to make sure that Wally gets a chance to answer all of those. And then we'll just let you know as well when you can unmute yourself. Yeah, we'll come back in about 2 or 3 more minutes. So. Sorry, I realized not everybody would have seen the earlier when I was showing our calendar, but just note again, we're going to be doing a draw for two of these calendars here. They were designed by Chantel Daniels from chanteldaniels.com. The wording is backwards, but Moon Phases and Medicines. Each month has a beautiful design on it. And then also, the phases of the moon as we go. So if you would like to be entered into the draw, I've included the link in the chat to our feedback survey. And there's a little spot in there for you to enter your email address if you would like to be entered into the draw. So thank you, everybody. We'll get started in about a minute or 2. You can get going whenever you're
We
ready.
can go now?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome back. Um, so what I was going to share earlier is, uh, well, everything I've shared with you really, and the way I conduct the lodge, uh, uh, those are those are the ways I've learned. And why I want to say that is when you go to somebody else's lodge, right? Everybody runs them a little bit slightly different, you know? and and that's okay, right? That's okay. Um, One of the things I get asked sometimes when people come to ceremony, they'll might take me aside maybe, and they'll say, you know what, I had a few 3 nights ago, whatever, and that. I know I'm supposed to wait, whatever period of time. Um, what do you think, right? But I always put it back. I always put it back. One of the teachings that I've learned about that is sometimes when we come into a ceremony, especially with those toxins that still might be in our bodies and that, in that ceremony, those toxins also get released, right? And sometimes they might affect somebody in the lodge, or it might affect that person, right? That had a night or two ago, whatever. But I always tell people, you know what? You make that decision. I'm not going to make it for you, right? Uh, but you make that decision for yourself. And part of why I do that, a couple of reasons why I do that. Number one in that is um, uh, that person, they might really, really need that ceremony at that moment, in their journey, right? And again, who am I to say to that person, well, you can't, right? You can't because you did something, right? A night or two ago. Right? Um, but I always let them know, here's the possible consequences of that, right? In the sense in that possibly somebody might get affected by that in the lodge, or you might get affected, meaning that you'll have maybe a really hard time in the lodge. But you make that decision. Right? You make that decision for yourself. And and the second thing I always uh, talk to people about is as long as they come with that respect, right, for that ceremony, that's the most important thing, right? As long as they come with that respect for that ceremony. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention before we took our little break. What you'll find, like I said, is that everybody runs their ceremonies in different ways, and it's because they learned those teachings from different people. One of the things that was shared with me very, very early on when I first started walking my path by who I considered a wise man, who shared with me, he said, you know what? He said, if you're going to go on this journey, he said, go over there. He said, but also, you know what? Go over there. And go over there too, he said. Meaning, go to that ceremony, go to those ceremonies, go to those ceremonies, he said. And you know what he said? Take what you like, he said, from that ceremony, and leave what you don't like, he said. And do the same, he said. And he said, don't make the mistake, he said, of just going to one. And the reason he said is because that person that's leading that ceremony, he said, the person you go to, he said that person's only a human being. And what if one day that person falls down, he said, then you're not going to have anybody. He said. So I've always taken that to heart, in how, again, I've learned along this walk that I call my life, in that I go to a bunch of different ceremonies and learn from different people. Um, and I take what I like and I leave what I don't like. And the unfortunate thing sometimes, though, in some of our ceremonies, is sometimes we become really strict. And I understand the importance of having those protocols in terms of how it is that where we can walk, when we're around that ceremony. how we sit inside that ceremony, how we behave, right, outside and inside that ceremony. I understand all those protocols and the importance of that. But sometimes I also think, where's that coming from in terms of the person that might be running that ceremony? And unfortunately, sometimes we're very strict with each other, and sometimes that comes out in a way in that where I've seen a person or somebody getting scolded, right? Getting scolded, uh, and sometimes maybe that doesn't really feel good for that person, right? And my thinking always in that is if we behave that way towards those people that are just learning, those people that are just wanting to do that healing or begin that healing for themselves, then it's important that we think about how our words or our actions might affect that person. And again, like if we're too strict, if our words are too harsh, right? That person may not come back again, right? So I always think about that. I always think ahead in that sense. So part of like when I began and I shared with you that I run a gentle lodge, and that's part of what I mean by that as well, right? That I try not to be strict, right? But part of our role also is to teach, right? To teach in that, and to teach in the best way, in a good way. And we can still do that, right? We can still teach those protocols, right? Of how we conduct ourselves, what we need to do in the lodge. One of the last things I just wanted to share also in that is sometimes when women come to the ceremony and that, because maybe they're in their moon time, right? They might approach me in that to see, to ask questions in that. But one of the things I always try and do is I always try and refer them to one of the other women that might be there, right? That might understand some of those teachings that come for women in that way. And again, part of that is it's not my place, right? It's not my place to be trying to do those types of teachings. Right? So that's one of the things I also do when we're together in that way. Um, uh, so I'm not sure what else I could share with you about the sweat ceremony, but one of the things I think again for me in that personally in that is that it's a very beautiful ceremony. It's a very beautiful ceremony, uh, and I've seen a lot of healing for myself personally and for others as well too. Um, One of the things with this pandemic, right, is that we've had to you close our lodges in that way, meaning that we haven't been able to gather, to have those ceremonies uh, because of COVID. At least here in Manitoba, anyway, and I know it's different all over across Turtle Island, but I know here for sure it's been different in that sense. Um, so I don't know about a month ago, I guess, a friend of mine, a lady friend of mine, she came and she asked if I would, if I could do a sweat ceremony for her and her family. And I was really torn about that. But finally I said, you know what, like I won't be able to. I won't be able to because of the restrictions and everything. So she asked, well, is there another ceremony or a ceremony maybe that we could do as a family? So what that question did for me is it triggered a memory, and the memory was as a child in my community. Anytime we were sick, especially in the winter time when we were sick as children, and that, my cuckoo, my great grandmother, she'd get one of my uncles to go and make a fire outside the house, right? And she'd get them to put some rocks in that fire, and and in the living room, she would take the kitchen chairs, right? And she'd lay those chairs sideways, yeah? And she'd make a circle inside the living room with those chairs on their sides. And she'd go and gather all the blankets in the bedrooms and that, and she'd put them on top all those chairs and that, until finally they were completely covered. And she would get us to crawl in there, and there'd be room maybe just for two of us in there, and we'd crawl in there, and she would get my uncles to bring in those rocks, those heated rocks from outside, and usually they'd bring them in a cast iron frying pan. They'd bring them in there in that way, and she would slide that into that little structure that she had made in the living room, and uh, with the heated rocks, and she'd sprinkle some medicine on them, and then she'd pour water on them, right? And then she'd close the blankets, yeah? And we would lay in there, yeah? Being steamed. So I thought about that. That memory triggered for me, yeah? And I remember once I remember that, being in that in that structure myself as a little boy, and then I had a memory of seeing others in my community, right? My cuckoo doctoring them in that way, right? Helping to heal in that way many times. So I shared that with my friend in that, yeah? In terms of, maybe that's a ceremony you and your family could do, like by yourselves and at home. Yeah? So yeah, so I think again, like for us as indigenous people, and that we have our ways, we have our own ways to help ourselves, to heal ourselves, uh, and when a way is not there for whatever reasons and that, then we always find a different way. We always find a different way to heal ourselves, to help ourselves. So I thought I would share that with you as well too, and that to kind of wrap things up for the afternoon. So in saying that, again, I just want to say Gachumi Gretch, thank you to each of you that have taken that little bit of time to come and sit with us, to come and join us, and to come and listen, and hopefully maybe to ask some of those questions or even your comments, right, in terms of what I was able to share with you today. One of the things I would love to hear from you in that is what are you taking away? What can you take away from this afternoon session? That'd be awesome if you could share that as well. But anyways, I'll turn it back over to Amanda, and then maybe she can lead us in the discussion or questions. Miigwech?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much, Wally. I feel like there's always something really special in each session. Every time we come back, there's something unique that I feel creators trying to tell me, and you say it so well. Um, yeah, sorry, I'm just gonna get everything set up here. If anybody has any questions, we're gonna take a moment. You can unmute yourself, but I'll start with one of the questions that was asked in the chat. Um, Somebody asked, why was tobacco used, and is there anything else that is used as an offering?
Asema, tobacco. There's two teachings that comes with that medicine, at least that I've learned in that. Yeah? The first teaching is anytime we ask for something, we always offer that tobacco. Yeah? Maybe we need a ceremony, we find that person that can offer us that ceremony, we offer them that tobacco. Okay? Or maybe we have a dream, that dream doesn't make sense to us. Again, we'll go and find that person that might be able to interpret that dream. We offer them tobacco. Anytime we ask for anything, and we pray, when you see us praying with our sacred pipes, they say that smoke that rises from that tobacco, that's our prayers going straight to Creator. Yeah? The second teaching is anytime we give thanks, yeah, we always offer that tobacco again. We always give thanks as well. Yeah? Anytime we give thanks. So those two teachings definitely with tobacco, but that's not only the only medicine that's used in the sweat lodge as well too. In that, right? We use sage. Yeah? Sometimes we'll smudge before we go into the lodge. We usually smudge outside the lodge. We smudge the lodge inside before we even begin with sage in that. And like I said earlier, we usually use cedar by using that cedar like to acknowledge those grandfathers when they first come into the lodge. One of the other things we do sometimes in that, I know I do that at home in that, is before the ceremony, maybe the day before, I'll make a batch of cedar medicine, right? in a pot of, with water. And usually that's the medicine we'll use on the grandfathers, right? It's cedar medicine. Inside the lodge, one of the things that first round, those first two rounds, the thank you rounds, I always use juniper, okay? Dry juniper on the grandfathers as well. And part of the teaching for me that comes with juniper, it's a mind medicine. So it's to acknowledge that, sometimes, especially a new person that's coming into the lodge, they may be apprehensive, they may be, not knowing what to expect, all those kinds of things, right? So it's to acknowledge that, that our minds need that healing. So I call it like a mind medicine, right? It's just to ease everybody, to make them calm in that as we proceed in those first two rounds. Usually in that third round, usually the medicine I'll sprinkle on the grandfathers is bear root. Yeah? Not bear root, I'm sorry, weekends. We call it weekends. Yeah? Bitter root, they call it, right? But that one is like a body medicine, right? It's to acknowledge again that our bodies need that healing. With bear root, I mean, with um, that weakness in that, and that bitter root. It's very bitter when you bite it, and that, but that medicine is good for headaches, toothaches, all kinds of physical ailments, right? Colds, flus, that kind of stuff as well too. But that's usually one of the medicines we use in the lodge. And usually the third medicine I use in the lodge also usually for that last round is that bear root, and that's that spirit medicine, right? Because that medicine is like a medicine of medicines, right? It's a very powerful medicine. One of the teachings that comes with that bear root is when bears hibernate in the winter time, right? And when spring comes, like where we are today now, usually when that bear comes out of their den, that's usually one of the first medicines they'll go and sniff out, right? And once they've sniffed it out, they'll dig it out with their claws and they'll chew and they'll eat that bear root. And the teaching with that is that bear, instead of feeding its belly, right? The first thing it does is it feeds its spirit. Yeah? And that's that importance, right? Of us needing to feed our spirit as well, right? And that's usually why we use that bear root in that ceremony. But again, different lodges, they all use different types of medicines as well too. So no, tobacco is not the only medicine, definitely. Vivek, for your question.
Thanks. And another question we had was why do you call the stones grandfathers?
Again, that's just the way I've learned. I know in some lodges they call them grandmothers as well too. Yeah. Uh, Again, just for me personally in that, it's just something I'm comfortable with. And part of that for me maybe is because I didn't have those grandfather figures in my life. I don't know. I had grandmothers, and I learned lots. I learned lots from my grandmothers being a part of my life. But I didn't have those grandfathers like long enough. My own grandfather, he passed away very early in my childhood. So I didn't get to experience that as a boy growing up. So for me personally, in that, that's how I use them in that sense. I call them grandfathers, but like I've seen before in that, like also other lodges, they call them grandmothers. So there's that, different preferences.
Mhm. Yeah, we had a teaching recently with the Dakota, one of our Dakota knowledge keepers, and it, they mentioned that as well. Just because I guess the Dakota called them the grandfathers as well, and it has to do with the language and kind of like a translation type of thing. So that could be it as well. Um, another, there's a few questions just about you had mentioned the song that ends the fourth round.
Oh, right.
But if you could explain the Wendigo song, I
Yeah.
think. Mhm.
Okay, you know what? If you could hold off a little while longer, because I started with a song, I'm going to finish with a song later, and that's when I'll explain that question. But I'm glad that you reminded me. I'm glad that you asked that question.
Mhm.
Um, um, yeah. So, but I'll explain it in just a bit. Okay, if you can
Mhm.
just be patient.
Yeah, I figured as much, but Another one, I think you kind of answered it, but somebody had asked about the rules for women in the lodge. How I guess women are expected to wear skirts, and then people have, I guess, recently brought up that it's due to colonial influences. Um, but I guess like what would your thoughts be on that? And then another question that came up was about just the way that a woman sits in the lodge, like cross-legged versus with your legs together to the side. I've been in a lodge where I've been told you have to sit a certain way, but then I've also been in a lodge where like it wasn't brought up.
Mhm.
So.
It's a good question. And again, the teaching, I believe anyway, needs to come from a woman.
Mhm.
In the lodge, again, like when I've experienced in that, when I've run the lodge in that, some woman will ask me that. Usually, I'll try and refer them to another woman, another female, for that answer, maybe for themselves. But at the same time, I've seen women also sit in the lodge cross-legged, like you kind of said as well. Um, uh, yeah, so again, it's just something that I can't necessarily answer. Uh, Always the important thing for me, like I said earlier, though, is that respect, right? As long as they come with that respect for that ceremony, right? Um, that's what's really important. That's what's most important, I think, in that. But again, there's reasons why I think those were put into place, those protocols. Uh, but I can't speak to them, unfortunately.
Hmm. We have maybe for the person that asked about women's teaching is we have a teaching coming up next week. It's a TP teaching, and it's with one of our Anishinaabe knowledge keepers, Sharon. So perhaps perhaps that's a question we can ask her next week. Um, another question Roberto asked is we are working on helping our city learn better ways to help mentally ill. Instead of calling the police, what are or are there any healing ceremonies or interventions that you can think of that would help with that?
With mental health issues?
Or
Is
to
it?
help people not be so quick to call the police,
Oh,
and, instead
mm.
just
Well,
being
I
like,
think again, like here, the organization I work for here in Winnipeg, in that we work with a lot of our community, and sometimes some of those community in that they're dealing with addiction issues, obviously in that they're dealing with family violence issues, they're dealing with mental health issues as well too in that. But again, that's one of the areas we try and shy away from as well too, in that because again, our experiences has been that when we call the police, sometimes that intervention turns out, not so being helpful for that person, right? So one of the ways we try and tackle that is by trying to intervene in the best way that we can, to create calm for that person at that moment, at that time, and um, so, and that can be done in different ways. One of the ways we do that might be lighting a smudge even. Right? I've experienced many times in that in working with people when they're going through an experience, they're agitated, they're, emotionally upset or for whatever reasons, lighting that smudge in that and just, kind of being around in front of them with that smudge and that can also be very calming as well too. And that, at least that's what I've experienced in that. One of the other things I just wanted to mention as well too that I hadn't talked about in regards to that sweat ceremony, for those that are experiencing addictions in that, one of the things that we've been told in that is, uh, uh, how it is when we're in addiction, all those toxins are within our bodies, right? And it takes a while for some of those toxins to come back out again. And that's what we call withdrawal, right? When people are withdrawing, that kind of thing. But one of the things we're told in the sweat ceremony, for example, is when we bring a person that's struggling with addictions, either are in their first stages of treatment, maybe, that Sweatlodge is a perfect tool, a perfect vehicle for that person. Because what happens in the lodge is our pores all open up, right? And all those toxins just come out way faster, they say. Right? So that's one of the things I've learned in that, in regards, again, connecting it to this, to the lodge. One other thing I didn't mention earlier in that is we use our lodges in many different ways. And I've been in lodges in that, for example, that are grieving lodges. Yeah? I went to a community in northern Manitoba where they had a rash of suicides many years ago in the wintertime. I was out there trying to help support the community. So I got invited to a sweat ceremony. So I attended in that. And the conductor in that said this is a weeping ceremony. This is going to be a weeping ceremony. And what we did the whole 4 rounds was simply cry. We just cried, and it was so, so powerful. Uh, Experiencing that. That was my very first time ever experiencing that ceremony. And we did it in a lodge, in a sweat lodge, right? But like I said, like there's different ways or different types of ceremonies or different ways that we use that sweat lodge in that. Um, I was in another ceremony, another sweat lodge in one of our communities, Sagink First Nation, just north of the city here, many years ago. And this woman, she came and talked to the elder that was conducting the ceremony, and uh, uh, she was diagnosed with cancer. Right? And she was very, very sick in that. So she was coming for healing. Uh, so the conductor, the elder in that, he asked if 4 people would carry buffaloes in the lodge in that, buffalo skulls, right? So I was one of the ones that volunteered, and 3 other men volunteered as well. But what we ended up doing in that is we ended up uh, uh, piercing our backs, and that's how we carried those buffalo skulls inside that lodge for that woman's healing. Yeah? And he turned us all around to face the grandfathers, with the buffaloes facing the grandfathers. A really, really powerful ceremony, a healing ceremony, for that woman who was sitting outside the lodge, and he didn't get her to come in, but he had her sit outside the lodge. So again, we use our lodges in many, many different kind of ways, and at least from what I've experienced. And what I shared with you, that's only one way, right? That's only one way in how I run the lodge. Right? Like I said, everybody runs them in different ways. Everybody runs them for different reasons, right? And again, that's why our culture, or who we are, our ceremonies are so beautiful in that way, right? That you can never know what you're going to expect. Even though if you've gone to 20 of them already, the next one you go to may be totally different again, or you may experience something different. Right? So I always find that beautiful.
That is very beautiful. Um, Maybe before I go on to the next chat question, would anybody like to speak their question? If you would like to, you can unmute your mic and speak your question. Give anybody a moment. Sui?
Pardon me?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Sorry, I lost connection. And what was it?
We're just opening the floor to anybody who might have a question. Do you have a question for Wally or a general comment?
Well, it's been a journey, and I've just really enjoyed sitting with you and all the others in our circle today. And I want to wish everybody a good and rest of the day, and also Anish, to you, to the corporation or your group. Thank you so much for bringing us together, and all the good work that you and your team and knowledge keepers such as Wally and others do. Willal and all my relations.
Rich.
Thank you. Yeah, we're so happy that, knowledge keepers like Wally can join us and share and, take time out of your day to share these teachings with us. I think that it's really important that even though we have to be apart from each other and keep that social distance, that we're still able to come together in a good way, and hear these teachings. So yeah,
Hello.
I'm happy to help.
Could I bother you for a moment? Can you guys
Yeah.
hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
So like it's so easy to find people like say on Facebook Messenger and ask an elder for help and stuff. But like so if you wanted to be a part of a sweat and should you try to offer them tobacco? Like should you try to go physically find them first, or like how do you start the conversation with somebody about needing a help?
That's a good question. Definitely, I think you reach out to others, right? If you know somebody that either participates at the Sweat Lodge ceremony somewhere, or if you know somebody that's actually running a Sweat Lodge ceremony somewhere, yeah, it's okay to go and approach them and to ask, can I help or can I be a part of that? Can I learn? When I first attended my very, very first sweat back in the late 70s, I went with curiosity, um, not knowing anything, not knowing what to expect. And I just went and sat. I just went and sat and I listened and I watched. Uh, I didn't go in, barely spoke to anybody. I just kind of watched. And then I did that a few times. And then after a while, I would go and I would ask, do you need any help? Yeah, of course, we always need help. People would, can you go and get that wood, or can you chop that wood? Can you run to the house and get this, whatever? So soon enough, I was helping in that way. And then next thing I knew, I was shkabe. Okay? And a shkabe is that helper, right? It's that helper outside the lodge. That's that fire keeper, the one that's looking after the fire, looking after the grandfathers. Um, but it's that helper. And when I think about a shkabe and that as a helper, right, especially in ceremony, uh, I think about them as a person that's doing something from their heart, right? Because the shkabe is not expecting payment back, but they come and they give up themselves, they give up their time to make that ceremony happen. Like I said earlier, uh, we can't have those ceremonies without those helpers, without those shkabes. So their role, their job in that is just as important as the person that's running that ceremony. Uh, so I always acknowledge that. Yeah? But anyways, yeah, that's some of the things that you can do. One of the things I also tell people all the time in that, especially the ones that are just learning, that are just new, that are coming in that, is no question is a wrong question. Yeah? Every question, like, I always encourage people, ask, even if you think that question is dumb or something, whatever, ask it anyway, because we're all still just learning, right? And if we don't ask that question, then how are we to learn, right? How are we to learn? So I always encourage people, if you don't understand something, or if you see us doing something and you're curious about that, go ahead and ask, right? So that would be my thing for you in that is go ahead and approach. And, if you know somebody that goes to ceremonies, or if you know somebody that runs those ceremonies, it's okay to ask. Can I come? Can I help? Can I just come and observe? And whatever. Right? So yeah, good question though. You got.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Does anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask? Or more than welcome to unmute your mic at this time.
I just
Lorraine?
question about children attending the lodge. Is there a certain age that we should wait, or is it when they're asking, or when we feel that they're ready? Like, what is the general way?
That's a good question. That's a good question, actually. Um, Again, one of the things I've experienced, one of the things I've heard, one of the things I've I've seen is I've seen children in ceremony as well too, in that. But on the flip side of that, sometimes we're told in that, because of our children's innocence, right? That they're innocent, that they don't need ceremony in particular, right? At a very early age. But again, it doesn't stop us from having them be a part. Yeah? Um, Whether that's being sitting outside the lodge maybe with an adult, supervised, whatever, um, and for their safety, because again of the fire, right? Uh, or whether they come in. Sometimes I've had children just come into the lodge even before we bring the grandfathers in because they're curious. Children are curious, right? So they'll peek in, they'll look in that, and we'll say sometimes, come and sit down, right, for a while, whatever, before we bring the grandfathers in. So I've had children do that, little ones, right? I've also had children in that say they want to try it, and we say, okay, here's what you're going to expect in that. And then we'll have them come in with the rest of us maybe. But we always let them know in that if it's too difficult, if it's too hard on you in that, let your parent know, or whoever you're sitting beside, let them know right away. And we usually have that person watching them as well too, and asking like once in a while if they're okay, kind of thing. But if at any time it's too much for them, we open that door, we let them crawl back out. But I think again, children are just naturally curious in that when they see us adults doing something, they want to try it too, they want to do it too. In that, yeah? So to answer that, um, um, it's something that I've allowed, and I've had different age children in that. Youngest probably about 3 or 4 years old, to teenagers, youth, and that, and different age groups in between as well too. In that, but that's what I always keep in mind is that idea of curiosity. They want to try it, and if they can try it at least once, maybe they'll leave it alone for a while, but maybe years later in that. I've had young people come to me and say to me in that, I went to a lodge, I went to a ceremony when I was very young, when I was a child, with my parents. I didn't go in, or I went in, and this is the first time I'm coming again, right? So in that way, right, we're preparing, we're setting, that example for them as well. So, but it's a really good question, Lorraine, and I appreciate that question. I'm not sure if that answers it for you, but again, like I said, every person that runs their lodge, sometimes some of them might say no, sometimes they might say yes, uh, in that way. But I know for myself personally, like I said, like I've allowed it, like keeping in mind their safety as well too, in that. Because my thing in that is, that they need to have that good experience, because if we give them a bad experience, again, they may not come back after.
No, you've answered my question the best way that you can, I believe. What I find is that elders and knowledge keepers usually answer our questions with questions so that we find our answers for ourselves. So for
Yeah.
that, I say miigwech.
Miigwech.
Mhm. Um, One question that we had in the chat, I'll just go back. In regards to spirit names, somebody asked, with spirit names, when you're first given it, I know some people decide to have a feast ceremony and then have it translated to Ojibwe or Anishinaabe. What if that is not the instance and you don't do it immediately afterwards? Would it still be your spirit animal, your spirit name by the time you do decide to get it translated?
Again, a good question. Unfortunately, uh, uh, I can't definitively answer yes or no. I can again only share from my own experiences in that. Um, uh, One of the things I always tell people, if they're going to go and ask for their name, is to ask for your name, right? To ask for your clan, and also to ask for your colors all at the same time. Because if you don't do it that first time, if you only ask for your name, that person that's giving it to you that's the only thing they might go and ask for, right? So then that's the only thing they'll translate back to you is that name, right? And then you think after when everybody else introduces themselves, they're introducing themselves through their spirit name, their clan, and sometimes even their colors, right? And then you're sitting there, oh, I wish I had a clan, or I wonder what my clan is, or I wonder what my colors are, right? So I always tell people it's best to ask for all three, all in that first time when you go in that. As far as feasting, um, one of the things that we do is our bundles, for example, we feast them once a year, at least minimum, right? At least minimum once a year in that. That might be a good time also to feast that name as well too as part of that. Um, so yeah, so I can't answer definitively yes or no to your question in that sense. Uh, but again, it's always good to acknowledge, right? That's part of giving that thanks when we not only through that tobacco, but even with food, right? They say it's creating that spirit dish, right? Whatever food we have, uh, we go and offer that food as part of that feast. But what we're actually doing is we're feeding all our ancestors, all our relatives, when we feast that way, right? Uh, so it's like they're having a huge, huge feast while we're feasting, and that makes them really happy, right? That makes them really happy and honored that we remembered them, right? When we feast them in that way. So yeah, so again, I'm not sure if that answers your question in any way whatsoever. So I'm sorry about that.
I think that was still a great answer. I think, like the previous person said, I think answers come to us in different ways. Sometimes it's just a prompting to seek out those answers on our own or just kind of guide us in a certain direction, which is really great. Another chat question. Romeo asks, what does sweetgrass mean to you? In my community, we hold it as one of the four main medicines alongside cedar, tobacco, and sage.
Correct, correct, same thing. Uh, in I think one of our previous videos, I did share a teaching around sweetgrass, and one of the teachings that comes with sweetgrass, it's one of those kindness medicines because when you light it, it has a sweet, gentle aroma to it. Usually, we use 21 strands to make a braid. We divide them into seven, seven, and seven. The first seven will always represent those seven generations behind us. The next seven, they represent those seven sacred laws we all hear about: love, respect, honesty, humility, courage, wisdom, and truth. And then the last seven represent those seven generations ahead in terms of a reminder what we do to her is one day going to affect them. When we bring those 21 strands together to make that one braid, those three different braids, they represent yesterday, today, tomorrow, mind, body, and spirit, man, woman, child, or sometimes even man, woman, creator. But I shared last time that when my son was born, I made my son a promise that we wouldn't cut his hair till he was 7. So when he was 7 years old, we cut his hair. I cut my hair same time. This was 11 years ago. He's 18 today. But when my boy was 4 years old, he knew that teaching of that braid already because every morning I would take time to braid his hair. And as I'd be braiding his hair, I would ask my son, his name is Misko. I'd say, Misko, what does your braid represent? Sweetgrass, he'd say. Good. And what does sweetgrass represent? Kindness. It's a kindness medicine, Dad. Okay, good. And what does each of the three braids represent in your braid? My mind, yeah. My body, cool. What's the third one? My spirit. Oh, that's good. What are you going to do today at daycare, Misko? He said, Dad, I can be kind to my mind. Okay, good. What else? He said, I can be kind to my body. Good. I can also be kind to my spirit. What's going to happen if you do that, my boy? He said, Dad, I can be strong. Yeah? Because that's that second teaching that comes with that medicine, right? It's when it's through our kindness that we're most strong. Yeah? And that's one of the teachings I share all the time, and that anytime I talk about sweetgrass. Um, and the other part in that is our whole life is intertwined within that braid, and the mistake we make sometimes in life is a significant event might occur, a tragic event, a separation, or something, right? And sometimes we end up getting stuck and focusing just on that one event. And it's like taking one strand of that braid and we can break it easily, right? So we're always told to focus on all our journey, not just on that one aspect of it, to focus on the whole journey, because that's what makes us strong, right? So I always share that as well, anytime I talk about sweetgrass. But in Ojibwe country here, we also acknowledge those same four sacred medicines that you talked about. Sama, tobacco, that sage, that woman's medicine, that cedar, that protection medicine, and that sweetgrass, that kindness medicine. But thank you for your question. You got
Yes. Another comment, not really a question, just a comment, but you had asked our participants today to share what their takeaway is. Candace in the chat says, Chimigwich for sharing your knowledge. Their takeaway is the encouragement to return to the lodge, as it has been over a year since being in ceremony, and they're looking forward to it. I think she probably speaks for a lot of people who are just eager to go back to ceremony. I know springtime is, it's like that feeling of, wanting to break out of being inside all the time, and normally it's like when the powwows start up, when you start going back to ceremony, and it's like a season of renewal and like refreshing things. So I mean, here in Manitoba, our restrictions are kind of very slowly easing up. I don't think we're at the point yet where we can go back to gathering in groups for ceremony yet, but I know that I'm really looking forward to it for sure.
And thank you to that comment, and thank you to Amanda for adding to that as well too. And very true in that. I think again, a lot of us, want to be able to go back. And one of the things that I've been doing in that, since March and into now, and that is all those times, anytime I felt heavy because of what's happening or what's happening in my own life personally, and that. My lodge where I live, an hour north of Winnipeg, is across the road from where I live. And so there's two pieces of property. There's a concrete road that goes in between the property. But anyways, anytime I'm feeling heavy in that, I'll walk across to where the lodge is, and I'll go and sit outside. I'll go and sit in front of the lodge in that, and I'll listen, to the birds chirping away in that. I'll listen to the leaves, ruffling away in that. Sometimes I'll even listen to the chipmunks, the squirrels arguing away sometimes, whatever. And sitting there for half an hour, however long in that, somehow it just takes away all that heaviness. Yeah? So that's one of the things I've been doing in that. Yeah? Is even just being close to that ceremony, those ceremonies, right? Because all that residue is still there, right? If you want to call it that, in terms of all that work that's been done there, all that healing that's been done there. I look at my big pile of grandfathers in front of the lodge and that, right? The ones that we've used already, and that's what I think about, right? The hundreds of sweats that we've done there already, kind of thing, right? And all the people that came, all the people that brought that good energy, that left some of that good energy, right? So all those things I think about when I'm sitting there, right? And whatever is happening in my life somehow just kind of magically kind of just goes in that. One other thing in that I just wanted to share also in that, I started, first time I ever went to a Sweatlodge was probably around 1978, a very, very long time ago. So he wasn't even born yet, probably. Uh, and like I said, to go and watch, to go and observe in that, and then eventually I started going into in that. Right? So, anyways, I've been going to ceremony for many years in that. Was going to ceremony for many years, but it wasn't until maybe about 15, 16 years ago. I went to a ceremony in Saugeen First Nation, and I don't know what or for what reason, but anyways, I decided to offer my tobacco to the conductor, and I asked, can you give me my spirit name, my clan, my colors? Okay? And I offered my tobacco. And I think it was the third doorway when we opened the door. He said, okay, they came. He said, hey, here's your name, Bimashigi, you soaring eagle. Here's your clan, Mangagit Wadam. He said, that's your clan, Moon clan. He said, here's your colors, your medicine colors, red, white, yellow, and blue. He said, eh? But as soon as he said that to me, as soon as he gave me that, I just felt complete. Eh? uh, as a human being, as a person. I just felt complete, like just like a piece of me had been missing, but I hadn't known that it was missing, and all of a sudden it was filled. Yeah? Just by receiving that name, my clan, and my colors. So it was an amazing experience for me personally. Yeah? So like I said, like before in that, our ceremonies are very, very powerful. They can be very powerful. They can be very, very healing, right? And at the same time, one of the things I always enjoy about ceremony is the laughter. Eh? Again, us as Indigenous people in that, we joke around, we, just laugh and we tease each other. And to me, like, that's that medicine, right? That we all share with one another. Yeah, but I miss it too. I miss it too.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate and also miss kind of the laughter that comes, when you gather with a group of friends or, in a big group. There's just nothing like hearing people laugh that kind of lifts your spirits for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah. So
Um,
that last question about why did I wait 7 years to cut my boy's hair? I think that's what that is, right? I saw part of it, but I think that's what it's referring to. The last
um,
question.
yeah, it doesn't show up in my chat, so it might have been
Oh,
a
I saw
question
it. I
just for
saw it.
you.
Yeah, I saw it pop up on here with the.
Hmm.
But uh, for me, and that, like I said, like I don't know why, but seven's always like again for us, right? It always has had meaning, teachings, and everything else in that. So where that came from, I'm not certain. But as soon as my boy was born, I just made that promise that somehow seven was our magic number for him, that we would allow him, or we would make that effort not to cut his hair at least for 7 years, and then by then he would be of some age and understanding that if he wanted to grow it again or if he wanted to keep it short, that would be up to him at that point. But for us as parents, we decided that when he was 7 is when we would cut his hair. And today, my son, like I said, he's 18. He's growing his hair again. He's been growing it for a couple of years now. He had it short the whole other time. So it's beautiful to watch him and to see him with his beautiful long curly hair now today. One of the things I did with my son, my 18-year-old son, about 3 weeks ago, maybe, I asked him if he still remembered that teaching. Eh? And he said, I think so. He said, okay, well, tell me then, my boy. I said, what does that braid represent and so forth, right? And almost to the T, he still remembered. Eh? And one of the things about my son, Misko, in that is he's a very kind human being. He's a very kind young man. Eh? And I don't know, but maybe that had something to do with it. Eh? Teaching him very early when he was 4 years old already, teaching him about that mindfulness of being kind, and that his strength would come from that, right? So today, when I look at my son, I see him how he interacts with his friends, his peers, adults around him, and that he's a very kind young man. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate being able to see him in that way.
Hmm. Um, yeah, that's a good. Sorry, I just saw the question about
Oh,
your son's hair. So
was that
yeah,
what it was? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. I just
um,
saw part of it, but yeah, I kind of thought
yeah,
that's what.
and then I guess and the second part to that question is when you said he cut his hair, do you mean like cut or just trim it down or?
We cut the braid. Yeah, we cut the whole braid, and then we did the rest, like
Hmm.
to make him look like it wasn't a bull that did that, that kind of thing. Um, uh, and sometimes, like in the case of my son and that, I kept his braid and that's for me. That's a personal thing for me and that. Um, but sometimes in ceremony, uh, And again, I can speak to my daughters, for example, when they lost their mother, right? Both of my daughters cut their long hair, right? And they made that offering into the fire of that hair and that way as an acknowledgement of their grief, their hurt, their pain that they were experiencing at that time, having lost their mother. Right? So uh, again, we all do things for different reasons, but I have my own reasons why I've kept my son's hair as well too, all these last 11 years. And
Very true. Yes. I've been to a few full moon ceremonies where um, we we've taken the time to, you take your hair and you put it in the fire, and that is also a really powerful kind of um, acknowledgement of the power, of our hair. I think for men and women both, there's a special way that we treat our hair, and it's just sometimes we cut it for different reasons. It's not always the same. So it's interesting to hear those teachings as well.
Mhm.
Another question asked earlier is, like you had mentioned that you have a lodge in your Ojibwe. What are you able to sing, like Sioux songs in an Ojibwe lodge?
Mhm.
Are there rules
Well,
for that?
okay. Personally, for me, no, because I only for the fact that I don't know any Dakota songs or Cree songs, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Only for that purpose. If I knew Lakota songs or if I knew Cree songs and that, I would definitely sing them. And I've been into lodges and that where a person who is singing in that, has that experience, that knowledge, that gift to be able to sing two or three different tribes songs, whatever. And I've heard them sing those songs in ceremonies. Uh, um, but definitely, like when others come into the lodge that I help to run in that, when it's their time to sing in that, like I've had Cree people come in, for example, and they'll sing Cree songs in the lodge. Yeah. So to answer that, I guess maybe the answer would be no, right? In the sense in that it doesn't have to be only an Ojibwe lodge with only Ojibwe songs, right? It could be mixed as well too, and I've experienced that. And one other thing I just want to say in that as well is some years ago I had this group of educators from Minnedosa here in Manitoba, about 2 3 hours away, I guess. But anyways, they asked if we could do a sweat with them. They were all non-Indigenous people, all of them. They were all non-Indigenous people. So I did the lodge for them. They were all in the lodge with us, and now we had the door closed. That started traveling, and when it got to one of the women inside the lodge, and that she asked if it would be okay for her to sing a Christian song in the lodge. And I said to her, you know what? If that's what you feel you need to do or want to do, I said, by all means, go ahead. I said. So she started beating the drum and she started singing Amazing Grace. So she was singing Amazing Grace inside the lodge, and all the rest of us, we joined her. It was just like a choir inside the lodge. It was a beautiful experience for me personally because I grew up that way, right? My cuckoo was a Roman Catholic, but she didn't have blinders like this. Her blinders were like that, meaning she took me to gospel jamborees. She took me to ceremonies. So as a part of that, for me personally, today I love gospel music. Anytime I listen to gospel music, I just love gospel music. So to have that experience inside the lodge was for me very, very beautiful. Okay? So again, to answer your question, that I don't think it matters in that sense. Again, like if it's an Ojibwe lodge or a Cree lodge, if that's the only type of songs we sing because of those lodges and that. Okay? But again, it's up to that person that's conducting that ceremony as well, right? But usually, anytime I've gone to ceremonies, any other people's ceremonies, I've never heard anybody say, "Well, this is an Ojibwe lodge, and you can only sing Ojibwe songs in here. If you're going to sing a Cree song, you can't do that." I've never heard that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I've been in a lodge before, and that's the one thing that I really appreciated was that there was time um, when the person running the lodge kind of gave everyone the opportunity to sing, their songs if they wanted to. I think that's really special because it kind of gives you the opportunity to express yourself in a way that's, you know, your own. Um, and yeah, I guess that would fit in line if you're a Dakota person, in any lodge, if you're given the opportunity to sing or, share your song is going to be, in your language. So beautiful. Vincent says miigwech.
Mm.
Um, and then somebody had asked if you can share the lyrics to the Bear song. But I think I'm going to follow up with them afterwards via email because they're asking you to type it out. I don't want to ask you to type while we're sharing. If anybody else has a question that they'd like to unmute and speak, we have time still.
Hi. So when I was a child, I was given my spirit name, my clan, and my colors by my papa. But when I was a child, I didn't know the importance of it. So I still know my name and my clan, but I don't know my colors. Is there any way I can find those again?
Definitely, you can always go to that person that has those gifts to go and get those for you. And again, you offer that tobacco, right? And they'll come back and they'll give you. Um, One of the other things in that I've experienced as well too, like for myself, I only have that one name, right? But I've also known people who have multiple names as well too in that. And again, it's because they've gone through experiences which allows them to have that maybe, or have been gifted to that, with a second name maybe. One of the things in that is when we're gifted something, it's not good to say no, right? In that sense. So sometimes I've met people who have multiple names, spirit names as well too in that. And sometimes some children, will receive a name when they're very young, and then they become of age maybe, and maybe they might get a different name too at that time as well too in that. And so it depends, right? It depends on where we're going, who is gifting us those things. So that can happen as well too sometimes. Yeah, but right now, like, you can still, nothing's stopping you to say, you know what, I want my spirit colors as well too. One of the things I want to say about our medicine colors and that, like I said, mine are red, white, yellow, and blue, and I think I might have shared this before. But anytime I go and offer tobacco ties, for example, I use my four colors and I go tie them by a tree somewhere, and I say those prayers or whatever it is I'm asking for. One of the things, or at least a simple way maybe to explain that, it's like me taking out a business card, right? To give to somebody. Meaning, when I go and hang those four colored clots, those helpers, they'll come, they'll see those clots on that tree maybe, and they'll say, Bima Shigin, they'll say, soaring eagle. I wonder what he wants, right? I wonder what he's asking for, right? So if you can look at it or think about it in that way, that's why those medicine colors are important to us. That's why we see uh, or dancers, for example, right, at powwows or whatever, in that, in their regalia, they wear those specific colors that are theirs, right? That's their medicine. It's like their medicine. So the same with us as well too in ceremony. Anytime we go and ask for something, if we're going to offer a cloth offering as part of that, then that's when we'll include those. When we make our ribbon shirts for ceremony, women when they make their ribbon skirts for ceremony, maybe again they'll incorporate their own medicine colors as well too. But thanks for that question, Linda.
Thank you for your answer. My papa is very old now, so he's unfit to
Mm.
hold these ceremonies now.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
just hoping. Was wondering if there's any other way. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Jimmy Gwetch.
Miigwech.
If anybody else has any other questions, you can unmute. I had one question. It just kind of popped into my mind. Is there, like, I know when you seek out an elder, you kind of assume that they've reached a certain age, of life experience. Is there a certain age that you have to be to run your own lodge? Or is there?
Okay. Again, a really good question. And I think there's multiple ways to look at that. Well, the first part of it is the elder aspect. And I know for myself personally, and I think I might have had that. I'm not sure if it was with Eva or with you that I had the conversation early on. Sometimes people refer to me as an elder, and I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with that title. And the only reason for myself personally is that I believe I haven't earned it right yet. Yeah, I haven't earned it yet. Yeah. I'm 59 years old, right? Um, is there an age in terms of when a person becomes an elder? I don't know, right? Uh, uh, but I'm still learning too. I'm still learning. So in that sense, like I still feel I still have lots of learning to do before I would consider myself an elder in that sense. So that's the first part I wanted to answer in that. As far as running ceremonies, being holders of ceremonies, and that, again, the age I don't think really should matter or does matter in that sense. In that, I know of younger people that are leading, that are taking that responsibility on and running those ceremonies, whether it be sun dances or whether it be sweat lodges or whatever else. Uh, and again, I always watch on that. How are they coming at it? And if they're coming at it in a good way, then hey, that's awesome, right? That's awesome that our younger people are stepping up and taking on some of those responsibilities in that way. And if somebody wants to be called an elder, then that's really up to them in that sense. Uh, but I always question why, right? Why? Uh, and again, I think that's just my own curiosities. Uh, and so, what always is evidence for me is how is that person conducting themselves, right? How are they conducting themselves when it comes to those relationships they're having with everybody that's coming to them, that's listening to them, and so forth, right? How are they conducting themselves? Are they conducting themselves in that humble way? Are they conducting themselves in that respectful way? Are they conducting themselves in that loving way? In that truthful way, all those teachings, right? Are they walking those teachings? And then if they're doing that, hey, that's an elder, right? To me anyway, right? That person has that right, either if somebody placed that on them or if that's something they've placed on themselves, and maybe, yeah. But then you get the other side too, unfortunately.
Andrea in the chat says Elder Maria Linklater there told her that she was finally a real elder when she turned 70, and that's what her father had told her. But people had referred to her an elder before she was 70. So I guess there's like levels to elderhood, being called an elder. That self-recognition, but also the recognition from community. Yeah, and like at Anish, we use the term knowledge keepers, which is a bit different. I think it doesn't indicate an elder or like a specific age range, but just, you know, somebody that possesses those teachings and is willing to share, like you, Wally. So we're very thankful to know so many knowledge keepers and that you take time out of your day to share with us.
Yeah. Like for myself personally, that when people refer to me as a knowledge keeper, I just got vaccinated recently in that, and when I was encouraged to do that by somebody that I respect in that, she came and approached me as an elder because she said Indigenous elders should get vaccinated in that. So my thinking or what I responded in that is, okay, well maybe I'll wait then, in the sense in that I am going to take that vaccine, but right now I don't want to take it because I'm going as an elder. So then she turned around and said, well, you're a knowledge keeper. She said, "Eh? You're a knowledge keeper and you have this knowledge. We don't want that knowledge to disappear in that. So we want to try our best to keep you alive as long as we can, kind of thing. So
That's
maybe you
true.
should take it, right? So then I did take it. So I
Mhm.
said, okay. As if I'm going in as a knowledge keeper, then I'll accept that. And I'll go in and get vaccinated. So I did get vaccinated 3 weeks ago. But what I prefer in terms of being called is I love being called a shkabe, a helper. You know, shkabe. Yeah, I love that. I love that because part of that for me, again, like I said earlier, it's trying to do things from the heart, right? A shkabe. Yeah? So that's what I prefer myself personally.
Mhm. And that's so like what's the word, admirable. It really shows, you know, um the humility of your role as a knowledge keeper, and it's something to aspire to. Yeah, you set a good example, so thank you.
You got you.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question. Do you do anything after a sweat lodge? Because I just had a memory about when I was 15, 16, where after we got out of a sweat lodge, we sort of gathered around. There were a few bowls and we had one bite of each and we passed it around.
Mhm.
I don't remember the exact name of it, but
Yeah.
what do you normally do after a sweat lodge session?
Good question. Most times, at least when I'm running the lodge and that, most times in that, we'll sit outside as we're dressing, just talk, visit, catch up, laugh a little bit more, whatever in that. Sometimes, somebody will bring berries, right? Strawberries, blueberries, whatever, and like your experience in that. Usually they'll come in a bigger bowl and we'll pass them around. Everybody takes a little bit, and passes them around till they're all gone in that, right? Or sometimes we'll have a feast, depending again why we're having the ceremony. If it's specific to somebody or something, uh, usually the person that's asked for that, usually they might say, okay, you know what, I'm going to also offer as part of that a feast at the end. So sometimes again they'll bring that food, right, and we'll share that at the end of the ceremony as well. So yeah, so different ways, different things can happen in that way.
I think that's
But
probably
thanks for
one
your
of my
question. Yeah.
that's one part that I really like about the sweat lodges is, you know, how delicious and fresh the water and the food tastes after you're finished sweating. Um, it's like it tastes even better than usual. I think great.
One other thing I just want to share also in that, and I think this is something we're not mindful of sometimes when it comes to ceremony, whether it's Sundance or particularly Sweat Lodge, because that's what we're talking about today. One of the things that sometimes we forget to think about is the preparation for that ceremony to happen. Meaning that somebody will call or they'll approach somebody. Can you do a ceremony for us, a sweat ceremony for us, right? But then everybody shows up just before it's time to go in. And what they forget about is the 2 or 3 hours it took to prepare for that ceremony, right? Which is the chopping of the wood, making the bed for the grandfathers and praying over those grandfathers, cleaning up the lodge and around the lodge area, all those things that happen before we actually get there and we're ready to go in. So in saying that, I think it's important that we be mindful of that, right? That, you know, when we ask for ceremony, that we also offer our help or assistance to make that ceremony happen. And I think that's important, right? But I think again that's something we don't see or recognize early on because when we get there, everything is prepared, everything is done, the fire is just going strong. And we don't think about what happened before to get there, right? So I think again, just something to be mindful of. But your question kind of brought that thought. So thank you for that.
Mhm. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat. If anybody else would like to unmute and ask a question? I know that I'm looking forward to you sharing your song with us.
Yeah. Cynthia said also to help clean up after.
Mhm.
Good one. Good one.
Mhm.
True.
Yeah, the idea of reciprocity, I think, is fairly consistent in a lot of ceremonies and teachings. You know, if you're asking for something or you're participating in something, it should never be a one-way expectation. So making sure that you help clean up afterwards, or like offering tobacco when you're asking an elder for knowledge or teaching. Yeah, those are really important things. If nobody else has any more questions, Wally, would you like to share again? You had mentioned that you would explain your song and play it for us.
All right. So that first song I shared with you, this song I'm going to share with you. Anytime I sing songs and that, and with the last 2 episodes that we've done prior to today, I've shared other songs as well. But all the songs that I shared, they're all ceremonial songs. Every song that I sing in that is a ceremonial song. And the reason I sing those ceremonial songs in this setting is because that's what we've been doing. We've been having a ceremony. And what I mean by that is, we've come at it from here, in a ceremonial way, right? So that's why I sing these ceremonial songs. So I'm going to sing this last song, but I'll explain it when I'm done, okay? And I'll explain why I sang it. Backward, a contrary song. I call it a Windigo song. But it's through that last song that we acknowledge that each and every one of us, we're not perfect. There is not one perfect human being. Only Creator is perfect, right? And because we're not perfect, you know what? Today, after we leave here, We still might say the wrong things. We still might do the wrong things. The important thing in that, when we say or we do a wrong thing that affects somebody in a negative way, the worst thing is to beat ourselves up, just a waste of energy. The best thing, the only thing we should do in that, when we realize that our words or actions affected somebody, the best thing we could do is we can go back to that person that we affected, and from our heart we can say to that person, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So part of singing this last song is to acknowledge that we're not perfect, right? And because we're not perfect, nobody should ever expect you to be perfect. And least of all, you should never expect yourself to be perfect. Okay, so I want to leave you with that today as well too. And again, I just want to say, Miigwech, thank you for allowing me again to be part of your circle today. Miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Yes, thank you so much, Wally, for joining us. Like I mentioned earlier, I feel like I'm always learning something new every time you come back. I'm sure we'll have you again with us to share some more teachings in the future. So yeah, Rasicho, Miigwech. Just before everybody takes off, I just want to remind you that we're doing a draw. I have 2 of these really beautiful calendars here, created by Chantal Daniels. It's the moon phase of medicine, so they each come with a really beautiful piece of art, and each of the phases of the moon as the time goes. The link is in the chat for the survey if you can fill it out. It would just take a minute or two. It's a short survey, but there's a section to include your email address. So in about half an hour or an hour, I'm going to do a draw. I'll pick 2 names. So please go and do that. And then as well, we have an event coming up tomorrow. If you know any kids or people who love comedy in your life, we definitely encourage you to register. Tomorrow we have Ken Biggity with his Biggity and Biggity puppets. He says they're fresh off the trap line, so they're going to come and share some great medicine, which is laughter, which Wally mentioned earlier. So yeah, go to our Facebook page. The link is on our wall. We'll end up sharing it again. If you have any questions after today's session, if you would like to connect with Wally, you can contact me. My email is admin@anish.ca. And today's recording will be available on our website probably after the weekend. Our video person is just away on vacation, so it'll take a few days for it to appear on our website, but then you're welcome to rewatch or share with your friends. But on that note, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Have a smudge, take care of your spirit, take care of your body, enjoy the sunshine and fresh air. I think the sun just popped out here in Winnipeg, so great end to the day. So yeah, thank you so much, Wally. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day. All right, bye-bye.